Talk to me specifically about the case of Jamal Khashoggi.
So in the case of Jamal Khashoggi, this is a Washington Post reporter and a primary critic of the Saudi regime. He was lured into the Saudi Arabian consulate in Istanbul, in Turkey. And while his fiancée waited outside for him to get the paperwork he needed in order to marry her, he was murdered by the Saudi government, allegedly on the orders of the Crown Prince. Now, we have to ask ourselves, how did the Saudi government decide that he was worth killing? How did they decide when and how they would kill him? How did they know this opportunity was going to arise? How did they know what his plans and intentions were that they needed to stop from their perspective? We don't have evidence that his phone personally was hacked, unfortunately, because we do not have his phone. But we do have the phones of his friends who were living in exile in Canada. And we do know, thanks to the research of a group called the Citizen Lab, affiliated with a university in Canada, that their phones were hacked, which means their conversations with Jamal Khashoggi were intercepted, and this allowed the Saudi regime to know that he was intending to create an electronic protest movement. They didn't need to know from his friend's phone, or even from his phone, that he was traveling to the consulate because he had to make an appointment. But it did tell them his private intentions, his hopes and dreams for a different government for their country. And perhaps, although we do not know for sure, on that basis, they decided to murder him. Once your phone is hacked, what is in their hands is not simply your device, it is your future. It's important also to remember, how did the government of Saudi Arabia manage to hack these people's phones, which are modern phones? Well, they didn't have this capability in their government. They didn't have this level of intelligence capability available to them directly. So they purchased it from a digital arms broker, a company called the NSO Group, an Israeli company. In this company, the only thing they do is manufacture digital weapons, kind of hacking tools that can be used against the critical infrastructure that all of us rely on, the phones in our pockets. They primarily target devices such as the Apple iPhone. And they sell this capability to break into phones of people around the world for millions and millions of dollars to some of the worst governments on earth. And the only meaningful oversight that they have, unfortunately, because the export control laws for these kind of digital weapons are extremely weak in Israel, is their own internal ethics board that says, oh, it was fine, we didn't break any rules. That has to change.
What about the public attitude held by millions of everyday Americans? All I've got on a computer is pictures of my family, CCTV cameras that are prevalent in a ton of American cities and overseas capitals. Those cameras are your friend if you're innocent and have nothing to hide.
Well, I'd say that's very much what the average Chinese citizen believed, or perhaps even still to this day believes. But we see how these same technologies are being applied to create what they call the social credit system. If any of these family photos, if any of your activities online, if your purchases, if your associations, if your friends are in any way different from what the government or the powers that be of the moment would like them to be, you're no longer able to purchase train tickets. You're no longer able to board an airplane. You may not be able to get a passport. You may not be eligible for a job. You might not be able to work for the government. All of these things are increasingly being created and programmed and decided by algorithms. And those algorithms are fueled by precisely the innocent data that our devices are creating all of the time, constantly, invisibly, quietly, right now. Our devices are casting all of these records that we do not see being created that in aggregate seem very innocent. You were at Starbucks at this time. You went to the hospital afterwards. You spent a long time at the hospital. After you left the hospital, you made a phone call. You made a phone call to your mother. You talked to her until the middle of the night. The hospital was an oncology clinic. Even if you can't see the content of these communications, the activity records, what the government calls metadata, which they argue they do not need a warrant to collect, tells the whole story. And these activity records are being created and shared and collected and intercepted constantly by companies and governments. And ultimately it means as they sell these, as they trade these, as they make their businesses on the backs of these records, what they are selling is not information. What they're selling is us. They're selling our future. They're selling our past. They are selling our history, our identity, and ultimately, they are stealing our power and making our stories work for them.
What devices do you use in your life now, and have you accepted the notion that you are watched rather constantly?
Well, probably every intelligence in the world is definitely targeting me and trying to learn anything they can, just as they did with Jamal Khashoggi, in regards to what are my plans and intentions. I try not to make that easy for them. If I get a smartphone and I need to use a phone, I actually open it up before I use it. I perform a kind of surgery on it to physically desolder or sort of melt the metal connections that hold the microphone on the phone. And I physically take this off. I remove the camera for the phone, and then I close it back up, I seal it up. And then if I need to make a phone call, I will attach an external microphone on it. And this is just so if the phone is sitting there and I'm not making a call, it cannot hear me. Now this is extreme. Most people do not need this. But for me, it's about being able to trust our technology. My phone could still be hacked. My laptop could still be hacked. And just as I told you before, the same principles apply to me. If it is hacked, they can do anything to the device that I can do. So my trust in technology is limited. But just because that's how it is today doesn't mean that's how it has to be. And a large majority of my work with the Freedom of the Press Foundation, where I serve as president of the board, is dedicated to trying to make technology more secure, to try to create programs and protocols by which we can make the communications of sources and journalists more confidential. Because if we lose the confidentiality between sources and journalists, we lose access to those essential facts that let us understand what's happening in the world. And unfortunately, under this White House, just like under the prior White House, we see the sources of very important stories that have advanced the public interest facing retaliation from a very angry government.
I believe it's in the first half of the book, and I'm paraphrasing, you come out and just say, the computer guy knows everything, or at least he should. What part computer guy were you, and what part trained spy?
Well, for the vast majority of my career, I was what was called a systems engineer or a systems administrator. An administrator sort of maintains and expands a system that they have inherited, and a systems engineer sort of develops new projects, new capabilities for these systems roles. What this means in short was that all of the systems at the NSA and the CIA that I was put in charge of, I had total access to. And this is just what happens with a systems administrator. When you think about a computer system, who gives someone else access? Well, someone has to be the original authority that has access to everything. That was me. And so I say the computer guy knows everything. That's not a boast. That's simply the way these systems are designed. That's the way they're structured. And this is very much a vulnerability, because it means that you have to trust this administrator will work to the good of the users. But what happens when the people using that network, the people constructing that network, are going against the benefit of the broader society. And this put me in a very interesting kind of conflicted position. I could do what the NSA wanted me to do, or I could do what the Constitution of the United States, the public of the United States, needed me to do, which was report that my agency had broken the law.
Do you regard yourself as a journalist these days?
I'm not. I have tremendous respect for journalists, but I try to keep a distance, particularly in this moment where so much of journalism is coming under attack. Because the government has a tremendous incentive to discredit me, to make people distrust me. And so if I hold myself out, if I start reporting stories, if I start talking to sources, if I try to start advancing what the public knows on a personal level, my reputation could sort of poison the well. Instead, I keep a distinction. What I do is I try to aid the work of journalism, but I'm not myself a journalist.